the lore of League of Legends gets more popular, more and more people approach me with the question, I wanna see what the story is about. Where do I start? Well, the answer to that isn't so simple, because you can honestly start absolutely anywhere. All the stories are written in a way so you can understand them even if you know nothing. With that said, the question, where do I start, is still a legitimate one. And thankfully we can answer this question with a simple tool that gives wasting time a whole new meaning. A tier list. Now, some of you may know that we have already ranked champions based on how good their lore is. That video is still up on our second channel. However, that list got outdated really quick, and it didn't help those who would like to start fresh with the lore. So, here is what we are going to do today. We are going to rank champions based on the story you can find on their universe page. Because if you think about it, all the people who would like to start reading stories go to universe, they click on a champion and they start reading what's there. So for example, Aatrox should be really high up on the list. All the Darkin have pretty amazing story. But if I tell someone new that Aatrox has great lore and they go to his universe, all they will find there is a bit of his bio that doesn't really explain anything and his short story that doesn't explain anything either. It is only after you read about Shurima and the other Darkin that Aatrox gets really good. That's why we are going to rank champions based on what you can find in their own separate story. It's for the sake of the new readers. Also, I decided to change the tiers a bit too. So now, at the very bottom we got the outdated champions. These are mostly champions that didn't get their own story in the new universe yet. But then we have stories that are below average. Then there are the average stories. Then we have the good, the great, and above that we have two essential tiers. S is pretty simple. If something is S, it is really good and you should read it. These are usually written as standalone book-worthy stories, with some pretty awesome plot twists. But below that I added a world-building tier. These ones are also really good, but not because the story would be amazing. I mean, sometimes it is. But mostly it's because these champions explain the world. And by reading their stories, you will learn about all the events that are happening in the world of League of Legends. But you'll see what I mean by this as we go through them. And that's all the rules I've set up. Just remember two things. The quality of the stories is a matter of opinion, with the exception of the S tier. Those are objectively good. And because we are going to rank 150 champions, I'll go through them really quickly. So without further ado, let's get ranking. We have already mentioned Aatrox. He is pretty good, but he's not great because all the Darkin story is in other champions. Ahri has pretty awesome story, but these days she's just good. Akali, with the newest story, she is totally getting into the average tier. Not essential, but maybe if there is a new champion coming from her story, maybe she can get bumped even higher. Alistar, unfortunately, with the new remake he did get more interesting, but he's totally average these days. Maybe for some people he could get into the B tier. Amumu, unfortunately, is below average. The only thing we know about Amumu is a couple of legends, and none of them explained what even is Amumu. Anivia, unfortunately, is also below average. All the Freljordian champions have more lore about Anivia than Anivia herself. Even though Annie has a good cinematic, she might be in the average tier. Some would say that she's good, but if you really think about her story, she's way too simple. All we know is that she's the daughter of two warlocks from Noxus, she accidentally killed her sister, and that is it. The end. Aphelios, on the other side, is absolutely in the A tier. He explained a lot about the Lunari, he is pushing the world forward, and the plot behind Aphelios, as in the character, is pretty awesome as well. Definitely a deserving A tier. Same as Ashe. Ashe's story is pretty good, the comics bumped her even higher, and if you like Freljord, you will probably really like Ashe's story. Then there is Aurelion. Aurelion is definitely in the world building section. Because if you read Aurelion's story, you will learn what the heck is happening in the celestial side of Runeterra. Or at least you will learn about the formation of planets and stars. Although originally I wanted to put Azir into A tier, he's actually in the world building tier. And that's because if you really want to learn about the Darkin, the one story to explain everything is called The Twilight of the Gods. Unfortunately, that story is connected to two champions, Azir and Nasus. And God knows I am not putting Nasus as an essential story. Then there is Bard. We know nothing about him. Then there is Blitzcrank. These days he's kind of average. Some people could say that he's good because the story is pleasing to read, but there's not too much interesting stuff happening there. On the other side, Brand, and this might be a surprise to many of you, is an essential read. He's connected to Rise, the story of Rise and Brand is really good, and it explains the world runes. You could say it's a world building story, but the world runes are explained in the story of another champion, as you'll see. So Brand together with Rise, actually let me quickly find him there. There he is. Brand and Rise are absolutely amazing stories and you should read them. Then we have Braum. Braum would be average, but he's pushed up a little bit because the legends of Braum are pretty funny, they are really good to read, and it is just a fun champion to get into. Then we have Caitlyn. Caitlyn's story on her own is just good. It is a little bit above average, but there are other Piltover champions that are way better than Caitlyn, such as Camille. Now, Camille could be considered a world-building champion, because she does explain what is happening with hex crystals, but I would like to push her into the S tier instead, because Camille is still a staple for what an amazing story should be like. The story is super interesting, there are many plot twists, and you really have no idea how the story ends until you get to the very end. Camille was the first champion that really taught me that the world of League of Legends is getting really good. To this day, it is my favorite story in League of Legends. Then we have Cassiopeia. Totally below average. She is a really interesting champion, but Riot has never done anything with her story-wise. She was a greedy lady that went into Shurima, she was cursed, and she went back to Noxus. Cho'Gath, just like many void creatures, Cho'Gath has no lore. Yet. Corki, just like many Ordals, he has no lore. Yet. Darius, personally, for me, I would almost want to put him into B tier for good, but some people may consider him as an A tier for great, because the comics push him really high and he has relations to many other champions, but on his own, Darius is simply good. All the interesting stuff is in the stories of LeBlanc and Swain and pretty much anyone else, but Darius as a separate character is just fine. Then we have Diana. Unfortunately, Diana these days is just average. She used to be quite good, but as Riot released more and more great stories, Diana, together with Leona actually, got pushed back to just average tier. If you really think about it, Aphelios is Leona and Diana together, but better. That's why there is such a big gap between Aphelios and Leona and Diana. It's because the two Targonian aspects actually don't explain anything. Then we have Draven, who is totally average. Nothing interesting is happening with his story, he became an entertainer, and yet the story kinda failed to entertain me. Dr. Mundo, these days, is totally below average. There is no point to the character, nothing is happening in his story, that's why he's D. Then we have Echo. Echo is unfortunately also kind of average these days. He has this amazing ability to reverse time, and yet he has never used it for anything in the story. It's a really interesting champion and there is a lot that Riot can do with him, but so far they are not doing anything. Maybe the game will push him forward. Then there is Elise. Elise is low good. She's still above average, because her story is actually interesting, but it is not the best of the good. It is exactly the same as Evelynn. She is a demon who likes to feed on souls and that's pretty much it. The reason why she is B and not C is because the plot in her story, as in the way that she's luring people and she's dealing with them, is actually interesting. Then we have Ezreal. Ezreal is a solid A. He's been through so much in the world and he explained so many things. He even met a cultist of Mordekaiser who was trying to bring Mordekaiser back into the world. Ezreal legitimately has really good stories. Then we have Fiddlesticks, who is getting remade, so we have nothing about him. Then there is Fiora, who unfortunately is a little bit below average. I understand that House Laho is very interesting in Demacia, but Fiora's story is very average at the very best. Exactly the same as Fizz. The only interesting thing that happened to Fizz is that it was revealed that he is a Yordle. The end. But then there is Galio. For me, I would love to put him as an A tier, but there is one champion who kinda takes the spot instead of him. So just to be a little bit more objective, he is more of a B tier. But Galio is still very, very good. Then we have Gangplank. Out of all the pirates, Gangplank is great. There are other pirates who are not as good, but you'll see what I mean as we go through them. Then there is Garen. With all the comics and all the stories, Garen is a legitimately interesting champion and he is definitely a deserving A tier. Just like, and I'm gonna put her right next to him, Lux. Although, and as you'll see later, there is a reason why I want to put Lux into the world building tier. Because Lux explains what is happening with mages and she explains who are the mage seekers. And if you go through the story of Lux, you will learn about the mage problem in Demacia. That's why Lux is in the world building tier. Then we have Nar, who is totally below average. He was a yordle who froze, slept for millennia, and then he woke up. The end. Then there is Graves, and now we're getting to the pirates that I was talking about before. While Gangplank is A, because his story on his own is good, it explained how he lost his arm, and then the entire Burning Tide story happened, which really pushed his character forward. But while all of this was happening, the two other characters that were in that story, which is Graves and Twisted Fate, those two guys didn't really move forward, and these days they are just good. Then we have Hecarim. Hecarim is definitely in a world building tier. Because if you read Hecarim's story, together with Callista, you will learn about what is happening with the Ruined King. These two guys definitely explain what is happening on the Shadow Isles. Then we have Heimerdinger, who did get a part in the comic with Jinx and Ziggs, but Heimerdinger on his own still doesn't really have a good story, or rather any story at all. Then there is Ilaoi, who these days is average. She has a little bit less character than even Graves and Twisted Fate. That's why I have to put her below them. Then there is Irelia. Now Irelia also has to be in the world building tier, because she is the only Ionian champion who explains what is happening with the invasion. You know, the Noxian invasion. No other champion really does that so well. Now Ivern is a solid B tier, but me personally, I would like to push him into A tier, and that's just my personal bias. I really like Ivern's story, it has a really cool twist, and it is just a nice read. But again, to be objective, I need to put him down into the B tier. Then we have Jenna, who does have a canon place in the world, but she is below average. She's a spirit that only exists if people believe in her, and in the modern days people only believe in her in Zone, because they need some fresh air. The end. Then there is Jarvan. Jarvan, on his own, is actually B tier. His story is good, he appeared in the comics, but he didn't move forward nearly as much as all the other Demacians. Then we have Jax, and because if you look at Jax's universe, that's where you can find the story called Where Icathia Once Stood. Because of that, Jax is absolutely an essential read. The story Where Icathia Once Stood was absolutely amazing, and if you don't want to miss out on a really good story, you need to read Jax. Then we have Jace, who is totally average. Then we have Jin. Now many would put Jin in the S tier, but on his own, Jin is great. But he gets better only when you read about everyone else. You need to know about Shen, you need to know about Zed, you need to know about the invasion, and you need to know about the Kinko. Only after you go through all of those, Jin gets really good. But on his own, he's only A tier. Then we have Jinx, who is also average. Actually, she is below average. It's because she is crazy, the end. Then there is Kai'Sa, and Kai'Sa is also just average. And that's because, even though she might be seen as an interesting character, her story doesn't really make that much sense. She was a young girl who fell into the void and survived for no reason at all. And in fact, all the interesting parts in her story are taken by Kassadin. That's why Kassadin is above Kai'Sa. Kassadin has Kai'Sa's story, but better. Then there is Karma. Karma is set up really well, but they are not really doing anything with her yet. It seems like they will push Karma forward, but as of right now, she is a bit average. Then there is Karthus. Karthus is definitely good. That's because he's the only Shadow Isles character who joined the Shadow Isles willingly. His character is super interesting, it is really twisted if you wanna read it, and it will get you hooked in. Then we have Katarina, who is also average. Nothing's really happening with her story, she's an assassin, the end. Then we have Kale, who needs to be in the world building section, together with Morgana. The reason why Kale and Morgana are in the world building section is because they explain what is happening in the ancient Demacia. These two characters alone gave Demacia so much more history. Then there is Kain, who is just good. Then there is Kennen, who is still outdated. Even though he appeared in the latest story of Akali, he does not have a story of his own. Then there is Kha'Zix, who is average. And he's average because the good parts of his story are in the story of Rengo. That's why Rengar is in a B tier above him. Then there is Kindred. Now Kindred are solid good, but they could be great. That one is totally up to your opinion. I'm gonna put them into A tier because they are just a good read. If you have nothing to read and you read Kindred, you'll probably enjoy it. The thing is, I can't put them into world building even though they represent the Grim Reaper of Runeterra, because the story of Kindred brings up more questions than it answers. Then there is Kled, who is unfortunately below average. He's an angry Yordle, the end. Then there is Kog'Maw, who is outdated just like many other void creatures. Then we have LeBlanc, who on her own is just good. Her story is nice for explaining what happened in Noxus, it has some nice plot twists as well, but her story only gets really good once you learn about the other champions. Then we have Lee Sin, who is also good. He meets some other champions, the story of how he lost his sight is really good, but he's lacking good plot points in his story. Then there is Lysandra, and Lysandra is absolutely, for some people S tier, for me, world building. That's because if you wanna learn about Freljord, you need to read about Lysandra. She's the one who explains the main plot point of Freljord. Then we have Lucian in the A tier, together with Senna. I'm not gonna put them in world building, because although they kind of talk about the Ruined King, they don't explain it as much as Hecarim and Kalista do. Then we have Lulu, who is totally average. Maybe good for some people, for me she's a little bit average. Unlike the other Yordles, she and Tristana do actually have stories, which means that let me put Tristana there. Although Tristana would be above that. Tristana has a little bit more background than Lulu, even with the fact that, by the way, Tristana and Lulu did have a story together with Draven, but even so, they are not going above the B tier. Malphite is unfortunately average. He used to be a meme, we used to know nothing about him, then they updated him, but he didn't move that high up in the ladder. Then there is Malzahar, who I assume does have a story, but absolutely nothing happens there. Then there is Maokai, who might be in the average tier, because he's essentially on the same level as Malphite, but his story is actually a bit more interesting than that. Then there is Master Yi, also in the B tier. I almost wanna put him in great, but he doesn't have that much lore behind him. Although he does explain where did Doran's shield, sword and ring come from. Then we have Miss Fortune, right next to Gangplank. I said Gangplank. Miss Fortune is the other pirate who moved forward with each new story. She got a comic of her own, the Burning Tides moved her forward, and she even got the Shadow and Fortune story. Essentially, she has a lot of lore behind her. But then, we have Mordekaiser. I would love to put him as an essential read, but he might be more of a world-building story, because he really does explain what is happening with Noxus. But to me personally, he's definitely an S tier. You know what, it's my list, why don't I put him there? Then we have Nami, who is average these days. There are some interesting plot points, but again, her story never goes anywhere. Then we have Nasus. Remember how I mentioned that Azir and Nasus are both connected to the Darkin story? Well, on his own, Nasus is average at best. The story always mentioned how he's a brilliant tactician, and yet we have never got a story where he was actually planning a war, or even a single battle. He could be such an interesting champion, but Riot never did anything with him. Which is exactly the same thing as Renekton. These two guys are totally average. Then there is Nautilus, who is in the B tier. Then we have Nico, who is unfortunately also average, despite the fact that she shows a little bit more about the Vastaya Shirei, who are the ancestors of all the animalistic creatures, which are called Vastaya. In fact, even though Nico and Nidalee are connected together, Nidalee is a bit more of an interesting character than Nico. Then we have Nocturne. Unfortunately, Nocturne on his own has just fine story. He would be in the A tier. Once you read about Zed, you realize what the shadow magic is, and you even go through some of Lux's stories. Then we have Nunu as B tier. Some people would put him as A tier, because it is a heartwarming story that's just fun to read, but it's not something that would make you want to read more and more stories. Then we have Olaf, who unfortunately in the past was really good, but these days he is below average. Orianna on the other side is a great story. She's a little bit older, but her story aged really well. The plot twists are really good, and she's an interesting character. Then we have Ornn, who needs to be also in the world building section. Ornn's bio is fine, but the legends of Ornn that are connected to him explain a lot about Freljord and the shaping of the continent. That's why he's there. Then we have Pantheon. Unfortunately, Pantheon is a really interesting character, but his story is just not moving forward. We constantly get new teasers as to what might be happening with Targon, but nothing ever happens there, unfortunately. Then we have Poppy. Poppy is also a B tier. She explains a bit about Demacia, not more than Kayle and Morgana. Her story is good, but it just needs a bit more meat in it. Then there is Spike, who unfortunately is average. Then there is Kiana. Kiana is good. She's above average because she has enough interesting stuff in her story, especially since she explained a whole new region, but honestly she's not really amazing. Then there is Quinn, who is totally below average. She's a hunter, the end. Then we have Rakan, who is totally a B tier, together with Zaya. Then there is Rammus. Some people may put Rammus into A tier for great. To me, personally, he's just B. He's good, but he's not amazing. Then we have Rek'Sai, who is below average. She does have story, she's part of the world, what the heck is she? Then there is Riven, and Riven is a B tier. That's because Riven is interesting, and there is the Confessions of the Broken Blade story. But all the meaty good part of that story is eaten by Yasuo. That's why I'm gonna put Yasuo into A tier. Because on top of the story with Riven, Yasuo has really interesting story with Yone, and he has some really interesting stories together with Talia. Rumble is outdated. Sejuani, just like Ashe, they are both amazing. Sejuani, in my opinion, is a little bit better, but they are both solid A tier. Then we have Set. Set right now is good. There are some solid setups for future stories, but right now I can't put him into A tier. Not yet. Then there is Shaco. Shaco is still outdated. Riot teased many times that they are going to rewrite him, but nothing happened yet. Then we have Shen. Shen is A tier. Maybe. The thing is that Shen together with Zed, they are both amazing, but Zed is a bit better than Shen. With that said, I can't put Shen into B tier. They are both still way too good. Actually, let me put them next to Jhin. Shyvana is below average. She's not even average because her story was set up and then it kind of vanished. Silas arrived, Demacia was updated, and Shyvana wasn't there. Then we have Singed. Singed is above average. He is good because his story, together with Warwick, is pretty twisted and it is pretty fun to read. Just be careful, it is pretty horrifying. Then we have Sion, who is below average. Then there is Sivir. Out of all the characters in Shurima, she is just fine. Then there is Skarner. Originally, Skarner should have been world building, because he explains what's happening to the Hex Crystals, but Camille does that way better, which means we need to rank him without that, which means that he is totally average. Sona! Below average. Then we have Soraka, and Soraka has to be in the world building tier, because Soraka is the one who explains all the celestial shenanigans. Together with Aurelion, these two guys are amazing if you like the space sci-fi stuff. Then we have Swain. Swain is good. I wanted to say great, but that would be just my personal bias. If I look at all the characters who are in the great tier, Swain wouldn't fit there, but he's still pretty good. Silas is essential. He is the reason why I put Lux into world building. Because if one of these two guys is in world building, the other one has to be in the S tier. Because Silas and Lux together are absolutely amazing, and if you have not read their stories, you are missing out on a lot. Silas, definitely my favorite character of 2019. Syndra is absolutely great. Her story is amazing, she sets up a new plot points for Ionia, and she's fun to read. Tahm Kench is average. He's not below average because he's interesting, but he's nothing amazing. Talia is just good. All the parts from her story were sucked out by Yasuo. Talon is below average. He's an assassin. The end. Tariq is good, because he is a character unlike anyone else. He is a Demacian soldier who was sentenced to die by climbing Mount Targon, which is where he became an aspect. Teemo! Even though we got a lot of information on mushrooms, he is still outdated. Thresh is good. He could be great, but the thing is, all the interesting parts about Thresh are in the stories of Senna and Lucian. So he is really good, but the story is in the other characters. Trundle is average. Tryndamere is average. He does have connections to Aatrox and Ashe, but the story of both Aatrox and Ashe are better than his. Then there's Twitch, who is below average. He's a mutated rat, the end. Then there is Udyr. Udyr is a definite A tier. I am considering putting him in an S tier. You know what? He is an S tier. Because the story Silence for the Damned is so good. You can't pass on that. That is an essential story you have to read. It is that good. Then we have Urgot, who is interesting. There is some setup for future stories, but until he gets out of the prison, he is just good for now. Varus is absolutely great. I love the idea of having 3 souls in one body fighting for dominance, and his character is just super interesting. Varus is great. Vayne unfortunately these days is just good. Her story is really good. The thing is, the stories of other champions got better. So it's not that Vayne would be bad, her story is good, but she got lower because other champions got better. Veigar is great. And he's great because his story is legitimately fun to read. Then we have Vel'Koz, and Vel'Koz has to be in the world building section. That's because Vel'Koz is the one who explains the Watchers. He explains how there was nothing and then there was something and the Watchers woke up and Runeterra appeared in the middle of nowhere. Just like Aurelion and Soraka, Vel'Koz is the one who explains what happened at the beginning of time. Then there is Victor, unlike Jace, who is, I believe, in the average tier. Victor is above that. Formerly my favorite champion lore-wise, these days he is just good. Then there is Vi. Vi has to be above Caitlyn. So while Caitlyn is good, I need to put Vi into A tier. Because all the amazing stories about the cops in Piltover are in Vi's story. And she even has connections to Urgot and all the other kids from Zone. Then there is Vladimir. Vladimir could be in world building because he explains a lot about the Darkin, but Azir does better job at that. That's why I'm gonna put Vladimir objectively into the B tier. I would love to put him as A because I love his story, but he's good. And there is Volibear. Volibear is getting updated, therefore we have no idea who he is. Wukong is just like Master Yi, but worse. Wukong is average. The good parts about his story are in Master Yi's story. Then we have Xerath. Xerath is absolutely amazing, but looking at today's standards, he is not A tier anymore. He's B tier. But really good B tier. Then we have Xin Zhao. Xin Zhao is going up there right next to Garen. Xin Zhao turned into an amazing character with the Demacian update, especially after Sylas escaped his prison. Xin Zhao got super interesting. Yorick is just good. He's above average because he's a bit more interesting, but he's not amazing. Yumi is just good. She is above average, she's interesting, but she's not amazing. CZECH is almost below average. He's average. Interesting enough to be average. Ziggs. He has one comic, nothing else. Zilean is good. Almost great because he explains a lot about the world. But with the recent updates to Ishtal and Tikathia, Zilean is pretty good. Zoe, I would love to put Zoe into A tier. The thing is that the one story where the aspect of Twilight appears, which again is Twilight of the Gods, which talks about the Darkin, that one is not on Zoe's universe. Therefore, she's just good. I would love to put her into A tier though. And lastly, we have Zyra. Zyra is good. She's not great because there is no point to her story. Stuff just happens and that's it. But that is it for the entire tier list. If anyone ever asks you where they should start with reading the lore, show them this list. This should honestly be a pretty good guide for new people. But again, remember that you can absolutely read anything. Everything is written in a story so you can understand everything even if you know nothing. With that said, don't be offended if you don't like my ranking. We are living in a world of opinions, and you're watching a tier list video. I am pretty sure you came here for my opinion and not quality content. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other league facts and stories? And did you know that we have need mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.